You will not believe how quietly Olympus rises, not with fire or conquest, but with the gentle breath of wind that drifts through olive groves, and the tremor of old stories still whispered by shepherds beneath the stars. You can almost smell the thin, sharp air of the mountain, part cloud, part myth, and feel how it hums with a presence that never quite left. Long before marble temples or golden thrones, before Zeus hurled thunder or Hera plotted her divine jealousies, there was simply a mountain and the humans who dared to imagine something beyond it. They looked up, as you do now, wondering what might be waiting above the clouds. You probably would not survive the climb. Few mortals ever did, even in legend. But tonight, you do not have to. You only need to listen and let the story carry you upward, step by step, from soil to sky. But before we begin tonight's story, if you really enjoy these calm history stories, please like the video and subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your comments mean a lot to us. They help us to keep the work on. Now, dim the lights and let's go back in time together. You stand in a meadow where the earth smells of wild thyme and wet stone. The sun is falling and the shadow of Mount Olympus stretches like a sleeping giant across the land. You feel it, that shiver in the air between wind and silence, as though something ancient is breathing under the soil. Long before the word Olympus meant heaven, it was simply a tall, stubborn mountain in northern Greece. Its peak disappears into cloud, and to the early farmers and wanderers, that was enough to call it sacred. You can imagine them barefooted, tired, curious, tilting their heads back to watch the mist swirl around the summit. No one dared climb too high. The air grew thin, and the clouds hid strange lights, so they made a rule. The gods must live there. It was not science that crowned Olympus. It was awe. When lightning struck its slopes, they heard Zeus clearing his throat. When snow melted into rivers, they called it the gift of divine mercy. You watch a shepherd boy pointing to a thundercloud, telling his friend that someone up there is arguing again. It is funny how belief begins, with a joke, a gesture, and the silence that follows. Historians now trace the name Olympus back to the pre-Greek peoples, perhaps from a lost word meaning bright or heavenly. No one is certain, and scholars remain divided here. Was it the mountain that gave birth to the gods, or the gods that gave Olympus its name? It is a gentle chicken and egg of mythology. You can choose either and still be right, because faith is less about proof and more about how the wind feels on your cheek when you look up. By the Bronze Age, small shrines dotted the foothills. Offerings of barley, milk, or honey were left for invisible guests. No great temples yet, only smooth stones arranged in circles, each one glistening with the faint sheen of oil or rain. You kneel by one of them now. The stone is warm. Someone pressed their hope into it not long ago. A curious side note whispers through archaeology. Some early worshippers may have thought Olympus was hollow inside, a kind of cosmic beehive where divine voices echoed through stone corridors. They said when the mountain rumbled, it was not thunder, but the gods turning in their sleep. You smile at the thought. A whole pantheon snoring gently beneath the rock. It is oddly comforting. As night falls, torches flicker along a distant ridge. Villagers gather in a half circle, sharing stories that mix the ordinary and the impossible. You listen to the old women laugh about how once a man climbed too far and came down with hair turned white from the sight of eternity. Is it true? Probably not. But you notice how each listener glances at the summit and grows quiet for a heartbeat longer than before. That pause, that respectful hush, is how Olympus truly rose. Somewhere a flute begins to play. The sound is soft, circular, curling like smoke around the campfire. Children chase the shadows of sparks, and you realize that the mountain is not the only thing glowing tonight. Their faces carry the first reflections of a divine imagination. And while you stand there, the horizon blushes with stars. The air grows cooler, smelling faintly of pine and distant snow. You draw your cloak tighter. The mountain looms larger now, a dark crown set against a silver sky. You think you can almost see shapes moving in the mist. Not men, not quite gods, but something in between. You take one slow breath. The earth hums beneath your feet. It feels like the beginning of everything.
Dawn slides over the slopes like golden silk, and you find yourself walking along a narrow ridge where clouds cling to rock. The air tastes faintly of salt and iron, as though lightning has only just passed through. Below, the valleys of Thessaly shimmer with dew, and from somewhere far beneath, you hear the bleating of goats, the small, stubborn soundtrack of mortal life. But here, so high above the fields, the world changes tone. Every gust of wind feels deliberate, as if some unseen hand is rearranging the air. You begin to notice that the old poets were not merely telling tales. They were mapping their fears and their hopes onto every rumble, every flash, every drifting cloud. To them, weather was language. When thunder rolled across the ridges, they did not hear physics. They heard a divine argument. It begins with Homer, or perhaps with the singers before him, who described the gods as walkers, not ghosts. You can picture them leaving damp footprints on the granite, laughing in storms, their voices shaking the valleys below. Zeus's stride, they said, was the sound of thunder itself. Poseidon could make the mountain tremble simply by breathing heavily. You chuckle at that image. The sea god wheezing after a long hike, causing mild earthquakes by accident. Even the ancient bards might have smiled at the thought. Yet beneath the humor, there was reverence. They imagined these beings as enormous but familiar, divine yet oddly human. They quarreled, feasted, and even napped. When clouds gathered around Olympus, people said it was the smoke of their banquets rising from the peaks. If a storm broke over the plains, perhaps Ares had thrown a cup again. It is all so vividly domestic, a celestial household full of thunderous moods. Archaeologists have found faint traces of ritual sites on the lower slopes. Simple altars, no grand temples yet, where travelers left bits of food, small bronze figures, or carved pebbles shaped like feet. That last offering is strange, is it not? Tiny stone footprints meant to mimic the steps of gods. Maybe they believed that if you left one on the path, a divine foot might rest there in passing and bless your journey. It is a tender thought, half faith, half wishful hospitality. Historians remain divided here, of course. Some argue that these myths emerged as metaphors for natural power, lightning as judgment, rain as renewal. Others insist that people genuinely believed that unseen giants lived up there, close enough to hear the bleating goats? Perhaps both are true. After all, belief rarely travels in a straight line. It meanders like a mountain stream, finding its own level between sense and wonder. As you climb higher, the world below grows small. You pass an old tree clinging to stone, its bark polished smooth by centuries of wind. A crow lands nearby and tilts its head at you. For a moment, you almost ask it for directions. Maybe that is how myths begin, a conversation with a creature who never answers, yet seems to know more than you. The air is colder now. Every breath feels like sipping the edge of a cloud. You hear faint thunder far away, not a roar, but a heartbeat. You imagine the gods stirring, stretching after a long divine nap. Hera scolding Zeus for thunder that woke the valleys again, Hermes darting between clouds, carrying gossip from mountain to mountain. And perhaps Apollo, radiant and amused, leans on a ray of sunlight, watching you climb and thinking, mortals still have the best stories. You pause to rest on a rock slick with dew. It glimmers like polished marble, and for a second, you could swear it hums softly. Ancient travelers said that Olympus itself was alive, a kind of bridge between worlds. The summit, they believed, was never still. It flickered between visibility and disappearance, appearing only to those chosen by the gods. A romantic notion, yes, but there is something sleepily comforting about it. The idea that heaven only reveals itself when you are calm enough to notice. One mainstream historical fact whispers in through the clouds. The actual height of Mount Olympus is nearly 2,918 meters, tall enough to touch the weather systems, but not the tallest in the world. Yet, for the Greeks, it was high enough to host eternity. You smile. Sometimes grandeur is not about altitude. It is about imagination. Somewhere behind you, thunder laughs again. It sounds almost friendly this time, like an old companion reminding you not to take myths too seriously. Still, you keep walking upward. The air grows thinner, and the path narrows to a whisper. Below, the plains shimmer with sunlight. Above, the sky begins to glow white. You realize, the higher you climb, the more human the gods become. Maybe that is what the old poets meant all along. You cannot separate heaven from earth. They breathe through each other, like two sides of one enormous lung. The wind lifts your hair and murmurs something ancient, something that sounds almost like laughter. You take another step toward the clouds, where the footprints of gods fade slowly into mist. You find yourself descending slightly along the mountain's shoulder, where a cluster of huts huddles around a smoking fire. The air is sweet with pine resin and roasting barley. Here, on these quiet slopes, stories have their own hearth. You sit among shepherds and wanderers, faces soft with firelight, voices rising and falling like waves. Each tale they tell is a small spark tossed into the darkness. One says that lightning is the forge of Hephaestus, hammering the sky into shape. Another insists it is Zeus teaching mortals to behave. The children laugh at both ideas, until an old woman with hair the color of frost raises her hand for silence. She begins to speak slowly, her words curling upward like smoke. You listen. The story is not yet the Olympus you know, but something rawer, closer to the earth. In her version, the gods are not eternal rulers. They are born from the mountain itself, from fire and stone, from the hiss of rain meeting dust. They rise not as kings, but as the breath of the world taking shape. When she says this, a coal pops in the fire, and the crowd murmurs softly, a small, reverent sound. Archaeologists once uncovered shards of pottery near these very foothills, painted with faint spirals and figures that seem half human, half flame. It is possible that before Zeus or Hera had names, there were nameless spirits of mountain and storm, divine moods rather than deities. Historians remain divided here, some calling it proto-Olympian worship, others believing it was an entirely separate faith. Whatever it was, its embers still glow in the old woman's tale. The night deepens and sparks drift into the sky, each one a tiny reflection of the stars above. Someone passes you a clay cup of wine, thick and rough but warming. You sip, and the taste clings to your tongue, like memory itself. You notice how each storyteller shapes Olympus differently. For one, it is a palace of clouds. For another, a fortress of stone. For a poet who sits quietly beside you, it is simply a place where words and wind meet halfway. That poet's name, you learn later, will vanish into time, lost among hundreds whose voices carried these myths from mouth to mouth. Their stories were the first architecture of Olympus. Each retelling added another stair, another column of thunder. The mountain grew taller with every word. That is how belief expands, not through force, but through repetition whispered around a fire. You feel the rhythm of their speech, the long pauses and soft laughter. They do not hurry their sentences. They let the night fill the gaps. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the mountain breathing with them. The wind sighs through the pines, and an owl calls once, twice. The flames crackle like distant applause. A curious side note drifts in with the smoke. Some later myths claim that Prometheus shaped humanity from clay, using earth gathered from Olympus's slopes. He mixed it with divine fire, and from that blend of dust and light, humans came to be. You glance at your hands now, half expecting them to glow faintly in reflection. Imagine that you, made from mountain soil and stolen fire. No wonder mortals keep looking upward. Part of you remembers where you came from. The old woman finishes her story. No one claps. Instead, everyone sits quietly, watching the sparks fade into the night air. You can sense what they feel, a delicate bridge between the human and the divine. For a brief moment, the mountain, the sky, and the stories all seem to breathe together. The poet beside you finally speaks, his voice low and sleepy. Perhaps, he says, the gods do not live on Olympus, but as Olympus. It is such a soft, strange thought, one that sticks to your mind like the scent of smoke in your clothes. It lingers as you rise, stretch, and look toward the pale rim of dawn. Far above, the clouds are tinged with light. You watch as the first sunbeam touches the summit, turning it gold. For an instant, you could swear the mountain smiles back. You begin to walk again, your steps slow, steady, your thoughts wrapped in the warmth of that fire. Each stone you pass seems to whisper a name. Each gust of wind seems to carry a memory. You realize that Olympus does not rise suddenly. It builds itself patiently, story by story, like a dream rehearsing its own beginning. But before we begin tonight's next part of the story, if you really enjoy these calm history stories, please like the video and subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your comments mean a lot to us. They help us to keep the work on. You take a deep breath. The air is crisp again, tinged with the sweetness of morning frost. Somewhere above the tree line, the poets of the next age are waiting. You follow their voices up the mountain into the age of written myth. You follow a narrow trail that twists through the thinning forest. The air grows colder, and your footsteps echo softly against stone. Somewhere ahead, you hear the faint scratch of a reed pen on parchment, the first whispers of a poet who will give Olympus its immortal order. His name is Hesiod, and though he is no priest nor king, his words will rearrange the heavens. He sits by a small hearth in the shadow of the mountain, a man with weary eyes and the patience of one who has spent too long listening to wind. In front of him lies a scroll half filled with names, each one belonging to a god, a river, or a memory. You watch as he pauses, dips his pen again, and begins to list chaos, Gaia, Tartarus, Eros, the origins of everything. You realize that what he is writing will soon become the heartbeat of Greek mythology itself. Through his theogony, Hesiod does not merely tell a story. He builds a family tree tall enough to touch the clouds. The Titans, the Olympians, the endless chain of power and rebellion. It all climbs upward toward this mountain, like ivy seeking sunlight. You imagine the words glowing faintly as he writes, weaving myth into a kind of scaffolding that will support imagination for thousands of years. He speaks aloud as he writes, and you hear his voice through time. His tone is steady but gentle, almost reverent. He calls Zeus the father of gods and men. But there is a trace of irony there, as if he knows that power never stays still for long. He names Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, each one taking their seat in the divine council. You can almost see them forming out of mist, shimmering around him as he writes. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. Hesiod lived around the 8th century BCA, perhaps in a village called Askra, where he worked as a farmer before turning to poetry. Unlike Homer's heroes, his characters are not warriors. They are forces. Storms, love, justice, greed, each given voice and shape. It was through Hesiod that Olympus transformed from a place in the clouds into a living, breathing hierarchy. He did not climb the mountain himself, but his words did. You wander closer, careful not to disturb him. The pages of his scroll flutter in the breeze, and you glimpse a line describing Zeus's thunderbolt as both a weapon and a symbol of law. That is Hesiod's quiet brilliance. He turns natural power into moral order. Lightning becomes not just a flash in the sky, but the reminder that justice still watches. You can almost imagine him smirking slightly, as if to say, behave, or the clouds will take note. A curious side note drifts through the ages. Some fragments suggest that Hesiod may have believed the Muses themselves lived on a lesser peak of Olympus, singing to him in dreams. One evening, he claimed, they appeared before him while he tended sheep, placing a laurel staff in his hand and commanding him to speak truths both sweet and bitter. It is tempting to think that the story is invention, yet scholars remain divided here. Was it metaphor, poetic inspiration as divine visitation? Or did he truly believe the voices of Olympus had chosen him to write their memories? The boundary between faith and metaphor blurs gently like mist curling through cedar branches. Hesiod stops writing for a while. He looks toward the mountain, its summit veiled in gold and white. Even gods must have beginnings, he murmurs, and you realize how strange that idea once was. Immortals with childhoods, rivalries, and mistakes. His quill scratches again. Soon those mistakes will become legends. Cronus devouring his children, Zeus overthrowing his father, and the endless wheel of creation and rebellion. It is mythology's favorite theme, that even in eternity, power trembles. You sit beside the poet as twilight settles in. The firelight paints the inside of his hut in the warm color of burnt honey. Outside, the mountain glows faintly beneath a blanket of stars. You think of the countless generations who will one day read his verses without ever knowing his voice. That is how Olympus grows, through invisible architects like Hesiod, who build with words instead of stone. He looks up once more and smiles, as if aware of your presence. You cannot climb Olympus with your feet, he says softly. You climb it with your mind. Then he returns to his writing, and the wind carries his words into the night. You step outside. The sky has deepened to indigo, and the stars feel close enough to touch. Each one flickers like a spark from his fire, a reminder that imagination is the oldest light we know. You take another step upward along the path, toward the summit where Zeus will soon claim his throne. The wind grows sharper, the clouds swirl thicker, and somewhere in the distance, a low rumble of thunder answers the poet's final line. You walk into the clouds, where light and shadow trade places every heartbeat. The air shivers with a faint metallic scent, as if the sky is waiting to be struck. There is a moment, just before the thunder begins, when everything holds its breath. Then it comes, a sound so deep, it feels like memory itself, rolling through stone and bone alike. Zeus has arrived. You can almost see him, broad-shouldered, bearded, and entirely too dramatic for his own good. Lightning glows in his hand like a torch that refuses to die. But do not worry. He is in one of his calmer moods tonight. He is simply showing off. After all, what is the point of ruling heaven if no one notices the light show? You stand quietly among the clouds, watching as the myths gather around him like courtiers. Here is Hera, elegant and endlessly patient in her impatience, arms crossed as if thunder itself must justify its schedule. Below them, the world glimmers with flickering fires and tiny human hopes. For the first time, the mountain feels less like rock and more like a stage suspended between heaven and earth. It is strange to realize that this theatrical Olympus once had a political purpose. A mainstream historical fact slips in gently. Greek city-states often used Zeus as a symbol to legitimize earthly power. The thunderbolt was not only divine, it was diplomatic. When kings swore oaths, they did so under Zeus. To defy an order could mean defying the sky itself. You can imagine those leaders smiling proudly beneath murals of the thunder god hurling justice from above, pretending they too could summon lightning on command. Yet, as with all myths that grow too comfortable, cracks soon appeared. Some poets began to whisper doubts. Was Zeus truly just or merely powerful? The philosophers of later Greece would argue that real divinity must be beyond anger, beyond vanity. Historians remain divided here. Was the thunderbolt a moral lesson or a reminder of fear? You listen to the debate ripple through the centuries, each answer echoing differently across the peaks. Lightning flashes again. Zeus's face flickers in the glow, and you catch something almost human in his expression. A flicker of loneliness, perhaps, or the burden of being believed in for too long. You realize that gods, too, must suffer the expectations of their followers. What happens when mortals stop looking up? Does Olympus dim just a little? A curious side note floats in like a mischievous gust. Ancient Greeks sometimes swore oaths on small bronze thunderbolts sold at sanctuaries, tiny replicas of Zeus's weapon. To break such an oath was to invite the full weight of the sky's temper. You can imagine a merchant trying to explain late payment to a creditor. Forgive me, friend. Zeus must be busy smiting someone else today. You cannot help but smile. Divine bureaucracy, it seems, was alive even then. The storm softens into rain. You tilt your head upward, letting cool droplets run down your cheeks. Each one feels like a message from somewhere far beyond the clouds. The Greeks believed rain was Zeus's blessing, proof that heaven remembered the fields. You glance down and see the silver threads of rainfall feeding the rivers that glitter across the plains. There is something beautifully cyclical about it. The sky gives, the earth grows, the people tell stories, and the gods stay alive through their words. Zeus lowers his hand, the clouds part, and sunlight spills through like forgiveness. He looks down toward the valleys, toward temples that glint faintly in the morning glow. He knows that worship keeps the mountain awake. You sense his pride, but also his fatigue. Even immortals must sometimes envy the quiet lives below. A gentle thought occurs to you. Maybe the thunderbolt was never meant to frighten. Maybe it was simply a reminder that power without light is just noise. Zeus's storms end as quickly as they begin, and in that stillness afterward, you hear something fragile and human. The hum of distant prayer, the sigh of wind through wet leaves, the heartbeat of the world returning to calm. You take one slow breath. The clouds thin. Far below, temples gleam like fallen stars. You can almost hear philosophers arguing in the agora, priests whispering in sanctuaries, farmers thanking the sky for rain. Every voice rises toward Olympus, feeding it with belief, layer by layer. You smile to yourself. Zeus may rule the heavens, but you suspect it is the storytellers who keep the lightning charged. Their words, after all, travel farther than any thunder ever could. The storm fades into silence. The mountain exhales. You keep walking, your shoes damp, your heart light. The path curves toward a ridge where marble glints faintly, the first glimpse of the temples that wait among the clouds. The path steadies into marble. You look down and realize the stones beneath your feet are carved with names too faded to read. Each one belonged to someone who climbed this high to leave an offering, to whisper a wish into the thin, trembling air. The higher you rise, the lighter the world becomes, not just in sight, but in sound. The wind moves differently up here. It hums as if the mountain itself is remembering old prayers. Ahead, pale columns rise through the mist. At first, you think they are trees, but no. They are the ruins of temples, their roofs long gone, their marble slick with centuries of rain. You step through them slowly. Your footsteps echo, and it feels wrong to speak. You can sense how many voices once filled this place. Priests chanting, pilgrims whispering, maybe even a few goats protesting the climb. Long ago, this high sanctuary was not merely legend. A mainstream historical fact drifts in quietly. Archaeologists have uncovered traces of real worship on Mount Olympus itself. Altars where ancient Greeks burned sacrifices to Zeus Olympios, Zeus of the heights. They found charred animal bones, blackened pottery, and inscriptions that spoke of offerings above the clouds. Imagine the scene. Torches flickering in the wind, smoke merging with mist, and the smell of burning myrrh carried skyward as if the gods were inhaling from the mountain's own lungs. You walk between two standing pillars. They are chipped but steady, their bases wrapped in moss like green velvet. Someone once carved a prayer here, a plea for safe harvest, for calm seas, for love returned. You touch the surface gently. It is cold, but you feel warmth beneath it, the residue of centuries of hope. Historians remain divided here too. Was the real Mount Olympus truly a place of worship, or was it more symbol than shrine? Some argue that the height alone was enough, that the mountain existed as a spiritual horizon rather than a literal destination. Others believe that pilgrims did climb this high, offering sacrifices where the air thinned to silence. You stand between those theories now, half historian, half dreamer. Maybe both are true. After all, worship often begins where knowledge runs out. A curious side note lingers among the stones. Ancient priests believed that lightning-struck ground was especially sacred. If Zeus's bolt touched a spot, that place became a permanent altar. It meant the god had chosen to visit, however briefly. So, many of these temples were built exactly where thunder had once fallen. You grin softly. It is as if the ancients followed weather forecasts to schedule divine appointments. A soft breeze moves through the ruins. You can hear the faint clinking of bronze wind bells tied to forgotten altars. They sound like distant laughter. Maybe the gods are still amused by the mortals who left them fruit and flowers in exchange for sunshine. You picture a young couple centuries ago kneeling beside this very stone, offering honey and wine, hoping their marriage would last as long as Olympus itself. You smile. It probably did not, but hope is its own kind of immortality. The mist thickens again, and for a heartbeat, the ruins blur. When they come back into focus, they seem more complete, as if your imagination has rebuilt them. You see marble halls gleaming, golden statues, priests in white linen carrying bowls of water. A chorus hums softly in the distance, their voices echoing through pillars like the murmur of sea waves. You do not know whether this vision belongs to the past or to your own wishful dreaming, but it does not matter. For the first time, you understand what faith must have felt like. To stand at the roof of the world and believe you are being seen. The air grows colder again. Clouds drift through the temple floor as though reality itself is porous here. Somewhere behind you, thunder grumbles softly, a reminder that Zeus still listens. You step out toward the edge of the terrace. From here, you can see all of Greece, the rivers like silver threads, the Aegean glinting far beyond, and the endless spread of olive groves that shimmer under the sun. You breathe in deeply. The scent of rain, salt, and stone fills your lungs. It feels like the whole world fits inside this air. You realize the temples were never built for grandeur. They were built for perspective, to remind mortals of their smallness and of the beauty within it. A shadow passes across the sky, and you look up. The clouds shift, and for a second you could swear you see faces in the mist. The faint outline of Hera's crown, the glint of Athena's shield, the playful smirk of Hermes as he disappears behind a swirl of light. They fade as quickly as they appeared, leaving you with a quiet ache of wonder. You keep walking, and the path seems to change beneath your feet. The stones feel smoother now, as if thousands of divine footsteps have polished them over time. The air tastes faintly of roasted grain and sweet fruit. You blink, and the mists ahead begin to glow with a golden hue, a warmth like dawn trapped in perpetual twilight. You are no longer in the realm of mortals. You are arriving where stories said no human should ever go. The table of the gods themselves. You step into a wide clearing suspended in the clouds. And it's no ceiling, only sky, no walls, only drifting vapor glowing from within. A long marble table stretches before you, its surface shimmering with dew and light. There are chairs carved from single blocks of stone, each large enough to hold a thunderbolt. The air hums softly, and the faint sound of a lyre weaves through the wind. You can almost see them, shapes of light sitting at the table, their laughter like the chime of silver cups. Zeus sits at the head, of course, his hair flickering like stormlight, his eyes the color of dawn before lightning strikes. Beside him, Hera leans with the poise of a queen who has seen every secret and forgiven none. Apollo plucks his lyre lazily, each note floating like fireflies through the air. Artemis listens, her fingers tracing the rim of a silver goblet, as if timing her next hunt. You take another hesitant step. No one notices you, or perhaps they simply choose not to. The gods are busy feasting. Golden cups brim with nectar, and plates overflow with ambrosia, the food of immortality. You wonder what it tastes like. if it is sweet, if it burns, if one bite could unmake your humanity. A mainstream historical fact slips in here like a whispered aside. The Greeks believed that ambrosia and nectar were not just symbols of luxury, but literal sources of divine power. Ancient poets described them as glowing substances, sometimes honey-like, sometimes vaporous, that only the gods could consume. Mortals who tried either died instantly or transformed into something not quite human. You glance at the cup nearest you. It gleams invitingly, but you know better than to test mythology's patience. Curiously, one lesser-known tale says that on rare nights of divine celebration, the gods would spill a little nectar by accident, and where it touched the earth, flowers no one had ever seen before would bloom. Their petals glowed in moonlight, and shepherds called them the stars that fell asleep. You smile at that image, a bit of cosmic clumsiness leaving beauty behind. You move closer still, listening to their conversation drift like wind through reeds. Ares boasts of battles. Aphrodite rolls her eyes and calls him predictable. Poseidon taps the table impatiently, murmuring about tides that refuse to listen. Hermes, of course, sneaks fruit from every plate. Dionysus laughs too loud, slopping wine across the marble, and the stain ripples away as if ashamed to exist. It is chaos and comfort in equal measure. A divine family dinner with all its teasing, interruptions, and love disguised as rivalry. Historians remain divided here. Did these divine banquets represent actual rituals? Or were they poetic metaphors for the Greek idea of cosmic order? Some argue the feasts symbolized harmony, each god's domain in balance with the others. Others insist it was simply human projection, an attempt to imagine perfection through the mirror of earthly appetite. You, standing in the middle of this golden haze, can see both sides. If heaven had no laughter, what kind of eternity would it be? You feel the pull of sleep even here, as if the mountain itself is lulling you. Perhaps that is the true ambrosia, the peace that comes from imagining a world that never grows old, never tires, never runs out of light. You lean against one of the marble chairs. The surface hums faintly beneath your hand, alive with old energy. You look down and notice something small, a mortal-sized cup, simple clay among gold. A curious side note comes to mind. The poet Homer once mentioned that mortals were occasionally invited to dine with gods, if they had done something heroic enough. Usually, it ended poorly. Pride has a way of spoiling the appetite. You raise the cup anyway, pretending it holds water, and whisper a quiet toast to those who dream of Olympus and to those who never stopped climbing. The words vanish into the mist, but you imagine that someone, maybe even Hermes, catches them and grins. One small joke slips through the reverence. You realize that despite being gods, they still argue over who gets the last piece of ambrosia. Some things never change. Even immortality, it seems, cannot cure sibling rivalry. A sudden breeze ripples through the banquet hall, and the golden figures begin to fade, their outlines dissolving into cloud. You hear laughter scatter like sparks, And then silence returns. Soft, glowing, endless. You stand alone again in the clearing, surrounded by the scent of honey and thunder. Somewhere in the distance, a single harp note echoes, as if saying goodbye. You turn toward the summit. The sky is deep blue now, the kind of blue that feels alive. Ahead, a faint path continues upward, narrow and shining, leading toward the very heart of Olympus, where memory becomes myth. You take a slow breath and begin the final climb. The climb steepens again. The air feels sharper, almost metallic on your tongue. The gentle mists of the banquet are gone now, replaced by a restless wind that carries a low rumble beneath it, a sound that could be thunder or something older, something trapped beneath stone. You step carefully. Every few meters, the ground trembles faintly, and for a moment it feels as if the mountain remembers pain. You have reached the place where Olympus itself was born from battle. Not a peaceful birth, but a storm that shook the very bones of creation. They say that before the gods sat above the clouds, there were the Titans, vast, powerful beings who ruled before time had rules. Cronus, Rhea, Hyperion, Atlas, names too heavy for the tongue and too immense for comfort. You imagine them standing shoulder to shoulder, their heads brushing the sky, their eyes glowing like suns caught in stone. The wind that whips around you now feels like the echo of their breath. A flash of lightning cracks in the distance, followed by a roll of thunder that makes your ribs vibrate. It is easy to see how myths were born here. The mountain is alive with sound, the groaning of its own history. The war between gods and titans, the Titanomachy, is said to have raged across the heavens, each strike of thunder a clash of cosmic steel. Zeus wielded lightning, Poseidon churned seas into chaos, Hades split the ground beneath his enemies, and when the dust settled, Olympus was theirs. The old order was buried, and from its ruins rose a throne above the clouds. You can almost see it. The sky torn open, Titans hurling mountains as weapons, and Zeus shouting across eternity, his voice loud enough to fracture silence itself. Yet, for all its grandeur, this was also a story of family. Zeus fought his own father, Cronus, who had swallowed his children to keep his crown. It is the oldest pattern, the fear of being replaced. You murmur softly to the wind, parents and children always at war, whether gods or not. A mainstream historical fact joins this mythic storm. The Greeks of the classical period believed their gods mirrored human society, their quarrels, their rivalries, their ambitions. Temples were not built to worship perfection, but to understand imperfection on a grander scale. Even the Titanomachy, for them, was a reflection of political change, the victory of order over chaos, of civilization over primal might. You crouch near a cluster of rocks, one of them blackened as if by ancient fire. It could be volcanic, or it could be the scar of an old lightning strike. Either way, you feel the weight of ages in that stone. You imagine what it would be to live in a time when thunder meant war, and every earthquake was a reminder that the gods were still fighting underfoot. Historians remain divided here. Some insist that these myths arose purely from attempts to explain natural disasters, storms, quakes, volcanic eruptions. Others argue that they were moral allegories, the eternal struggle between tyranny and freedom, light and dark. You look around at the trembling horizon and decide both explanations are true. After all, every storm has a story, and every story hides a storm. A curious side note drifts in with the wind. The defeated Titans were not entirely gone. According to the myth, Zeus imprisoned them in Tartarus, a pit so deep that an anvil would fall for 9 days before reaching the bottom. But Atlas was given a special punishment. He was condemned to hold up the sky forever. Some say this is not punishment at all, but endurance turned into art. You tilt your head back, and for a moment, you imagine Atlas still standing out there, just beyond the clouds, his silhouette hidden by starlight, carrying the heavens so the rest of us could dream in peace. The wind eases. For the first time in hours, the air feels still again. You sense that the climb is almost over. The mountain no longer feels hostile, only watchful. You look back down, and the path you have taken winds through mist, like a silver thread stitched through blue fabric. Below you lie all the places you have already visited, the whispering ruins, the silent temples, the glowing feasts of light. It all feels impossibly far away now, as if you have already crossed from history into eternity. You whisper one last question to the empty sky. Do the Titans still dream? The mountain does not answer, but a low hum ripples through the air, a sound too deep to be thunder. Maybe they do. Maybe their dreams are what keep the world spinning. After all, even gods need something to push against. You take a final breath, steady yourself against the wind, and continue upward, toward the summit where sky and stone become one, and the heart of Olympus beats quietly above the clouds. The air turns thin, clean, and almost unreal. Every breath now feels like you are sipping from the edge of the sky itself. You are higher than clouds, higher than storms, higher than even the reach of thunder. The world below is a watercolor painting, blues and greens and fading gold. The summit of Olympus stretches before you, not as a sharp peak, but as a wide, wind-polished plateau, quiet and ancient as sleep. You step onto it softly, and the wind stops completely. The silence is so deep it presses against your ears, as if the air itself is listening. The ground here is pale and luminous, veined with faint streaks of gold that catch the light like threads of fire. You kneel, brush your hand against it, and realize it is warm. It feels alive, like the heartbeat of something vast, still pulsing beneath the mountain's skin. A flock of silver birds drifts across the horizon. Their wings flash in the sunlight, and their cries echo softly, like fragments of forgotten hymns. You watch them vanish into a higher brightness, and it feels as though they are carrying the last traces of the world below. Noise, memory, gravity itself away from you. Here, above all that has been told and fought and worshipped, you finally see what the ancients meant. Olympus is not just a place of gods. It is the space where silence becomes divine, where the soul of the earth stretches thin enough to touch whatever waits beyond. You look out over everything. The Aegean glimmers in the distance like spilled mercury. The plains of Thessaly shimmer in heat and history. Every kingdom, every story, every prayer feels impossibly small. And yet, from up here, it all fits together. The wars, the myths, the laughter, the endless attempt of humankind to explain the thunder. You cannot help but smile. Perhaps Olympus was never about power. Perhaps it was always about perspective. A mainstream historical fact drifts through the quiet. Mount Olympus, at 2,917 meters, is Greece's highest mountain, and in antiquity, few dared to climb it. The peaks were often shrouded in mist, and to those who looked up from below, it seemed the clouds themselves rested upon its top. A perfect home for gods. The first recorded ascent did not come until 1913, when modern climbers reached Mythicus, the nose of Olympus. What they found was no palace, no marble throne, only wind, rock, and sky. And somehow, that was more sacred than any temple. Historians remain divided here too. Was the mountain chosen by imagination because of its beauty, or did belief itself give it beauty in the first place? You tilt your head at the thought. Maybe faith and landscape were simply reflections of each other. Two mirrors facing forever, each keeping the other alive. A curious side note. Ancient travelers said that if you stood on Olympus's summit during certain dawns, you could hear music rising from the clouds. Not thunder, not wind, but something softer, harmonic, almost human. Modern science might call it wind resonance. The ancients called it the breath of Zeus. You listen now, and for a moment, you think you hear it too. You close your eyes. The mountain breathes slowly beneath you. Its rhythm is older than cities, older than the words used to name gods. You picture everything below. The glowing feasts, the temples in mist, the battles of titans, the pilgrims carving prayers into stone. They all blur together now, melting into a single stream of light that flows downward, back to the mortal world. And then, a small, unexpected laugh escapes you. All this way, all this myth, all this climbing, and it ends not with thunder, but with peace. No flashing bolts, no booming voice from above, just quiet. You chuckle again softly. It figures, after centuries of storytelling, the gods simply wanted to sleep in. You sit down at the edge of the summit. The stone beneath you feels smooth, like the curve of an ancient altar worn by time. The sky stretches endlessly, a sea of soft blue rolling over the horizon. The sun lowers slightly, turning the clouds amber, and for a brief, shimmering instant, it looks like Olympus itself is floating, a ship made of gold and silence sailing above the mortal world. You stay there for a long time. The longer you sit, the lighter you feel, as if every thought, every worry, every name you have ever carried is slowly being lifted from your shoulders. When you finally rise, you do not look back. You just breathe. You have reached where story becomes sky. And maybe that is enough. The mountain exhales, and so do you. You begin to walk down from the summit, each step softer than the last. The air grows warmer, the light deepens into gold, and the silence thins. not disappearing, just spreading itself gently over the world like a blanket. You do not rush. There is no need. Every stone, every breath of wind feels patient now, as if the mountain itself is guiding you home. The clouds drift slowly past, touching your hands like cool silk. You can still smell the faint trace of rain, the clean scent that lingers after lightning. It is the perfume of endings and of rest. The higher thoughts fade into smaller ones. The warmth of your breath, the rhythm of your heartbeat, the comfort of knowing that somewhere below, the sea still whispers against the shores of Greece, just as it always has. You imagine the first storytellers, farmers, travelers, sailors, looking up at Olympus from far below, pointing and wondering what kind of beings might live where clouds touch stone. Maybe they were not trying to invent gods at all. Maybe they were just trying to understand the feeling you have right now. That fragile, wordless awe when you realize the world is both bigger than you and quietly holding you at the same time. The path bends and sunlight catches in the mist like dust in a dream. You hear a single bird calling, its voice echoing off the cliffs, fading, returning, fading again. It sounds like a lullaby for the mountain itself. You smile, and your footsteps slow. The stone beneath your feet feels warmer now and softer somehow, as if the world is cushioning your descent. Everything you have seen begins to blend. The glowing banquet, the whispering ruins, the roaring titans, the silent summit. All of it folds into memory, and then into stillness. You can almost feel the gods closing their eyes above, the clouds settling into sleep. The air hums faintly, a heartbeat under the wind, and you realize the mountain was never only a place. It was a rhythm, and you have matched it. You pause halfway down, look back once more, and the summit is already lost to the light. It glows faintly in the distance, as if Olympus itself is slipping into dream. You whisper a soft thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to everything that listened. The mountain, the wind, the silence, even your own heartbeat. When you reach the lower slopes, the evening is waiting for you. The first stars blink awake. The air smells of pine, and far away, someone's fire crackles. You stop, breathe, and feel the night fold around you like a calm sea. You made it. Not to a temple, not to a throne, but to a quiet place within yourself. And that, perhaps, is where Olympus truly rises. Not above the clouds, but within the breath of whoever dares to dream of it. Now, let the thoughts soften. Let the climb fade into stillness. The mountain is resting, and so are you. If you enjoyed this calm history story, please do not forget to like the video and subscribe. Sweet dreams.